You're tuned in to Shake, Rattle, and Goal, the official podcast of your Springfield Thunderbirds.
Osmanski, a one-timer deflected side of the goal. Alexandrov scores!
Hosted by Matt Baker and Steve Forney. A show that's everything Springfield hockey, with interviews including players, coaches, and staff.
The Springfield Indians repeat as the Calder Cup champions.
Listen to this podcast on all major streaming platforms and wherever you download podcasts.
In his first year at the helm, Kevin McDonald and Drew Bannister have the Teamers in the Calder Cup Finals.
Watch the podcast on the official Shake, Rattle, and Goal YouTube page at SRG Podcast. And now, here are your hosts, Matt Baker and Steve Forney. All right, welcome to episode number 5 of the Shake, Rattle, and Goal podcast. Alongside Matt Baker, I am Steve Forney. This episode, as always, is brought to you by White Lion Brewing, your go-to destination for pre-games at Springfield Thunderbirds games. They're right in Toward Square, right in downtown Springfield. It's a pleasure to have them. And it's an absolute pleasure to be joined right now by Patrick Williams. He covers the AHL for the AHL.com, of course, also at NHL.com. Host of On the A podcast, and you can hear him on NHL radio on Sirius XM, and he is a 2016 Ellery Award winner, which is an awesome award to win. So congratulations on that, Patrick, and thanks for taking the time today.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So Patrick, again, thanks for coming on with us. So we're talking about the Eastern Conference here in the AHL. Are there, a quick overview? What should we expect? Are there teams that you, in your opinion, have drastically improved? Are there teams that, before the first puck drop, you're thinking contender?
The Hershey Bears, actually. Oh. And that's interesting because obviously last season they won the Calder Cup. And typically what happens in the AHL is those teams tend to get picked apart quite a bit over the summer. And to some extent they did, but both the Hershey Bears management and the Washington Capitals, their parent team, very aggressive in going out and getting some help, bringing in some of those replacements, guys that will now be hungry to come in and win possibly a back-to-back Calder Cup. So you have Todd Nelson there, he's already won multiple Calder Cups as a coach player in this league. So they're the one team where you look at and you're like, I don't think not only did they not get worse, I think they actually got better. From the season of when they actually won the cup.
How important is? I mean, I think Hershey is the grand standard of relationships between the AHL and the NHL. And Providence and Boston have a great thing going on too. But how important to AHL success and even player development is that relationship you have with the parent club?
Well, it's I think it's everything. Even in a market like Hershey where for the longest time, they did have a much larger degree of a little bit more independence and freedom to kind of do their own thing. But if your parent club nowadays, especially, is not bought into what you're trying to do down at the American League level, which is obviously yes to develop players, but I think what people forget is you also have an operation to run down here at this level as well, right? You have a fan base to keep happy, you have games to win, you have tickets to sell. And if you're not taking care of that side of business, the American League side of things is going to suffer, obviously. And, if you're the Washington Capitals, you're very happy to be in a market like Hershey. You certainly want to do what it takes to keep that relationship going. So it really is a two-way street that I think sometimes gets overlooked.
You kind of touched upon this with your overall overview of the Eastern Conference and the contender, but do you feel, is there such a thing as a Calder Cup hangover? I know, here in Springfield, we made that finals run in 2022 and got off to a little bit of a slow start. Is that typical? Is that to be expected? Not to say that, a Hershey won't be there at the end, but is there a Calder Cup hangover to start that next season?
Yeah, I think that that's a very real risk for any team. And if you think about like the players that have won the cup, right? Like that was supposed to be, at least for some of them, what would vault them into the NHL. And now if you find yourself, I won a cup, yet I'm still back in the AHL, I think there's a natural letdown. for players, and we've seen that. I think that Springfield team you mentioned is a good example, and really right down the course of years and years of evidence. But I think when you look at that, it was a short off season. Obviously, number one, they played all the way until June 21st. So there's that wear and tear aspect. There's also, I think, just the natural letdown of it wasn't that long ago you're playing deep into the playoffs, high pressure games, big crowds, lots of intensity. And now let's say you're in a 3-3. It's a Sunday afternoon. You're playing, as we know with the AHL schedule, can get very repetitive. You're playing a team where you've been there, done that. And you start to see some of those letdowns, and before you know it, it's mid-season, and maybe you're kind of hovering around 500. So that is something to guard against for sure.
Interesting. We're talking with Patrick Williams. You can catch his work NHL.com, theAHL.com. You can catch him on Sirius. Also, great follow on Twitter as well at PWilliamsAHL. And as we kind of look at the division, maybe it's just because we were so close to it this year, but it just felt like the Atlantic Division last year was just loaded. I mean, Charlotte was great. Bridgeport stepped up. Hartford, Providence. As you mentioned, obviously Hershey. Can we expect more of the same from that here in Springfield? Just competitive night in and night out?
Yeah, I think funny you mentioned Hartford. That was for me one of the big emergences last year. Right, that was a team that for years and years they missed the playoffs 8 years in a row, which in this league is almost impossible to do. But last year, for the first time in as long as I can remember, there was a real concerted effort to make that team stronger. Right up until the NHL trade deadline, had a lot of moves, and they ended up knocking off Providence, and I think was an upset. So you have a team like that, Springfield. You have obviously Providence, a team that's always solid. They always seem to find a way to be in the mix. Wilkes-Barre Scranton is I think one of the real interesting teams in the division. You have their Kyle Dubas management team coming in there. They've already been aggressive and starting to retool that roster down in Wilkes-Barre, where it's been a struggle for the last couple of years. So they look like they'll be much better. Charlotte, always strong, obviously. And then, Hershey, Lehigh Valley's got new management in with the Philadelphia Flyers. So that will be something to keep an eye on. So, it's going to be a tough division once again.
And it's good for Hartford too, because the amount of, when I would want to go watch a game as a fan, I would just go down to Hartford. And, you're talking about 3,000 fans inside of that massive XL Center. And it seemed like come playoff time, they started to really pack the house. And, I think for Springfield, having a good team is kind of what turned around things like attendance numbers and things like that. And you got to hope for Hartford's sake, they can keep that rolling.
Yeah. For all the marketing efforts that teams put, and that's great. I mean, in the end, it's still, putting a competitive product on the ice. It's not necessarily that you're winning championships every year, but, for the longest time, Hartford was just not only were they not competitive, they just weren't a very entertaining team to watch either. So to get a team like last year that, played up tempo a little bit, and, obviously was, young goalie like Dylan Garand, coming in, really starting to find his own, like a nice mix of prospects and vets, kind of really gave that market a shot in the arm, which it has needed for a long time, right? Like you're familiar with that market. It's been a struggle for a long time. And, they were aggressive again in the summer with the Rangers. So that's been good to see that market really start to come back to life a little bit.
One thing, Patrick, when the AHL released their schedule, one thing that was kind of a common thread on at least Springfield Thunderbirds fan pages was sort of a disappointment that we didn't see some of the East versus West. Do you know, is that something that the AHL is thinking about in the future to sort of bring those games back? And you mentioned it too, mid-season, it's repetitive. We've seen this team now 8 times. Is there a reason that they're doing that, or are there plans in the future to expand sort of these road trips?
Yeah, it was nice last year, right? Like with Springfield, playing Milwaukee, Rockford, Grand Rapids. I mean, teams that you really had never seen before, or, at least in some cases hadn't seen. I think, like for example, like Hartford was in that same boat, and they played Grand Rapids for the first time in 15 years for example. So it really does. The AHL is largely kind of neutral on the topic. It's up to the teams for the most part. Now, the catch is you have to find a dance partner, right? So if you're Springfield and you'd like to go out to the Midwest, let's say, but none of those teams out there want to make the trip and return, then you're kind of at an impasse, right? So, and the other catch is you need to make it worthwhile, right? So you need to be able to round up maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 opponents, that you can make it a worthwhile trip. You don't want to go out there for one game, for example. So that's one of the tricky things. But there is still some East-West play. I know Charlotte, for example, they're playing San Diego and San Jose this year.
Wow.
Kind of the real opposite ends of the spectrum. Belleville, Manitoba, Toronto tends to go out west a lot. There is, and then there's also sort of those, the AHL schedules, I mean, probably a show in and of itself, but you have a situation where you have Grand Rapids and Cleveland, who are actually opposite conferences, and yet I believe they play 8 times. That's one of the real challenges of also trying to make any sort of projections with this league is every team is playing such a different schedule. And if you happen to have a schedule where you're facing 1 or 2 of the top teams, maybe 12 to 14 times a year, that's a huge swing, right? So that lack of a balanced schedule among everybody really does, I think, make it difficult to really get a sense of who's a legit contender and who's maybe kind of been able to beat up on, a weaker opponent that they play all the time.
Yeah. And Charlotte makes sense because they have to fly to get pretty much anywhere.
Exactly.
So flying's not necessarily new to them, whereas here you can get to 80% of the division on a bus.
Yeah. I mean, Springfield, I remember the first time I ever went up there, I hadn't realized how close Springfield and Hartford were. And, it's about a 20-minute drive from one rink to the other. So one downtown to the other. So it is pretty remarkable. And then you have these other pockets, right? Like I was based in Manitoba for a long time, and you're a plane right away. Same thing with Colorado, Texas, like you said, Charlotte. So the geography of the league is definitely a little bit of a challenge at times, just to kind of make a schedule that works for everybody.
We're talking with Patrick Williams, covers the AHL on the NHL.com, AHL.com. You can hear him on Sirius XM. Are there a particular, I follow the Bruins. Obviously, we're in Bruins country, Boston Bruins country, and, there's so many young kids in there, whether it's Beecher, Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov, Matt Poitras is doing really good. Are there any players that you are really looking forward to in this Atlantic Division or even in the Eastern Conference that you just can imagine jumping right off the page at a really young age, and really making some noise?
That's an interesting question, just because, the players that you think you see a first round pick, for example, and that's obviously somebody that's jumps off the page, right? And so often you see a player fall on their face, a real highly regarded young prospect where, I think a lot of people, especially fans that aren't familiar with this league, think this is going to be just kind of a walk through the park. And then those players get to the American Hockey League. And this is, for a lot of them, the first time they really faced that, real setback. For a lot of them, it's been nothing but success, either all the way up through, junior or, college, wherever they're happy to come from, Europe. They get here and it's like, whoa, this is a whole different ball game altogether. So it's those second year players that I tend to find even more interesting, because, you think of like a Fabian Lysell, for example, right? I know he's been around for a bit, but you're trying to project where is their ceiling, and all right, that first year, that second year, maybe even for some players, it's a struggle, but are they showing that progression, or do they level off? And I think that's where a lot of young players really get into trouble because um, they don't show that continual progression. So I think um, uh, it's it can be a very difficult, very dangerous game. I think to read too much into a first year player, even sometimes a second year player. But for example, I'll give you like a Will Cauley in Hartford, somebody that I think Springfield fans would be familiar with, from seeing a lot of him. And like he had a great start as a rookie. Ended up really, as a second round pick, really showing well. Ended up you get in a couple, I think 4 games in New York. Then was a little bit quiet in the playoffs, right? As well as Hartford did in the playoffs, he was a little quiet to some extent. So, a player like him, if he ends up in Hartford this year, I want to see him come out and build on that year and like go from being a very, very solid, very good player to being dominant. And you want to see that dominance take over. And if players that can do that are the ones that ultimately end up making that jump.
And it's probably the first time for a lot of them they're playing against men. I mean, you've been playing against 16-year-olds. Now you're playing against, you're playing against guys that have been around. So that's a challenge too.
Money and jobs.
Right. And then there's the mental aspect of it too. There are guys that don't think that they should be down here.
Yeah.
Right. They think that they're NHLers, and then they come down and they're kicking rocks, and it's like, well, you gotta come down here and show that you can perform rather than bum around.
You see players like, the ones that end up like doing that and they end up being a healthy scratch at the American League level. Then that's where, all the alarms start to go off. So it's, and then there are other players that come in and, a month later they're in the NHL and they never come back. And I think there's been a sense, certainly among management and coaches the last number of years, that the timelines really are different, that you can't try to put too much of a, one size fits all approach with players development. Some are going to take 3 years. Some may figure it out very quickly. The main goal is to get them to the NHL eventually. And I think the worst thing you can do is you start to rush players, and that's where you see NHL teams get into all sorts of trouble, especially with the high-end first, second-round picks. There's so much pressure to get them into the NHL today that they rush them, and they end up really doing a lot of damage long-term to their, overall, projection and their ceiling of where they might be.
Yeah, fans have that problem too. They look and they say, players been in the A for 2 years, and here are their numbers. Why aren't they getting the call up? And it's, they're not watching these AHL games night in and night out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the other thing too, if you're only looking at the numbers, right? Like, a lot of these players, like, sure, if you just let them go off and do their thing, they can put up the numbers, but a lot of them are down here, and it's not necessarily the most glamorous part of the game, but they're here to learn how to play away from the puck, all that defensive play, all the things that coaches really, really, repeat over and over and over. It's not exciting necessarily. It's not going to jump off the page, but it's really necessary to play in the NHL long term, and it's what's going to keep guys up there. And the players that figure that out sooner are the ones that get up there. And there are a lot of guys that also have to sometimes completely reinvent their game. Like, they've been a scorer their whole life, and but it gets apparent that that's not going to be feasible, at the AHL and or the NHL level. So, they have to kind of reinvent themselves as a defensive player, a penalty killer, whatever's going to kind of get them to that next level.
Interesting.
Patrick, I have one more question for you. In Springfield last year, we saw guys like Tyler Tucker, Nicky Alexandrov, Jake Neighbors. They're going up and down. And you said it, and we want nothing more than for these guys to be playing up in the NHL, reaching their dreams. But I'm not one for excuses, but how much does that impact AHL teams when you do have guys going up and down a few times a month? Does that hinder team development? Is that a real thing?
Yeah, real thing. I think that's a great point. Just in terms of just lineup consistency, like If like you're bringing players up and down, like there's that trickle down effect all through your lineup. Now you're shuffling lines around, different roles. So and so has to go on the penalty kill now. Maybe they were not used to it. So and then the kind of the other side is those players sometimes go up to the NHL. They're actually not playing. They're sitting in the press box.
Yeah, right. Or they're playing 8 minutes a night or something.
Or they're and then they have to come back to the AHL. They're asked to play 22 minutes a night and play sometimes a completely different role. So yeah, I think the teams that tend to have the most success, like Tampa Bay and Syracuse, for example, for a long time, they really resisted that temptation to even start to bring players up and down, even for a couple games here and there. Like let them sit in Syracuse, let them, if anything, overdevelop, and then bring them up. And then when you bring them up, you keep them up. That's if you can actually, it's easier said than done too, right? Like once season gets going. And, the NHL team has needs, some of the best plans go out the window. But if you can stick to it, it does tend to work out better long term.
Awesome. Well, Patrick Williams, we really appreciate you taking the time with us today. We look forward to following your work all season long. Again, you can catch him writing on NHL.com, the AHL.com, SiriusXM, the hockey channel. And like I said, a great follow on Twitter. A lot of insight. We really appreciate you taking the time for us out here in Springy.
Anytime. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right, there goes Patrick Williams. It was an absolute pleasure to have him on. Just a wealth of information. Anybody that follows the AHL knows that he's kind of the go-to, and the NHL's got a zillion people that cover the sport. The AHL, unfortunately, has a handful, and Patrick Williams is the go-to guy. So we really appreciate him taking the time. And that sweet background too, Matt. It looked like I couldn't take my eyes off of that winter wonderland of hockey going on.
It's a Canada thing. Canadian.
That was awesome. It definitely is. So we appreciate him taking the time. And as always, this episode of the SRG podcast proudly brought to you by White Lion Brewing in their new location in Amherst on North Pleasant Street, of course, right in downtown Springfield as well at Tower Square, 1500 Main Street. The place to go prior to Springfield Thunderbirds games and parking in downtown. As we all know, it's a bit tricky these days. Make sure you park in Tower Square Garage and swing into White Lion, show them your T-Birds ticket, and they'll validate your parking for you. Of course, while you're there, grab some Boomer nachos, some Seuss mac and cheese, and any of their 20-plus beers that they have on tap. I was recently at a different establishment, and I got the White Lion beer. It was like a blueberry it was a sour beer. It was a blueberry marshmallow. It was absolutely fantastic. So even if you're not there, make sure you check them out at other establishments here in Western Mass or your local liquor store cooler. They are there. White Lion, now in Amherst and downtown Springfield, a proud local sponsor of the SRG podcast. Make sure that you tell them when you go there that the guys at SRG sent you. It's awesome to have those guys on board. Again, local company, and not to get too like behind the scenes ish, but when we get these interviews, Matt, we'll take them when we get them. You know what I'm saying? And if only we had them now as we're recording, because we have so many questions that Pat could answer. We could have gone on forever. One of the biggest things that we've been talking about, you and I, is this situation with Carolina, and how Carolina doesn't have their own AHL team. They basically divorced the Chicago Wolves, and the Springfield Thunderbirds are benefiting from it, as are a lot of other teams across the league.
Well, right. So this hit home to Springfield just this week when Jamison Reese and Dylan Coughlin were added to the Thunderbirds roster on loan from the Carolina Hurricanes. And it actually sounds more like it was the Wolves who divorced themselves from Carolina. Reading the article from hockeynews.com, it was the Wolves' decision to go independent. I'm not sure how or why that would benefit any AHL team.
Me neither.
Other than I when these kind of things pop up, I always try to it makes no common sense to me why as an AHL team you would want to do this. But I do think they were a little frustrated with the season last year with a few call-ups up and down, not being able to kind of control their own small organization. And maybe this is a bit of speculation here, but maybe when you are any sports team in Chicago, You kind of just want to do your own thing, and maybe that's just what they're trying to do. But I don't think it helps them at the AHL level, but it helps the Springfield Thunderbirds to an extent. The Carolina Hurricanes are one of the more consistent teams in the NHL. And, after Patrick Williams kind of talking about some of the behind the scenes stuff and what good teams are able to do, it makes sense how they run their organization and how they build from the AHL up. So this is a bad thing for Carolina too. Now, you and I are talking about this, and Jamison Reese and Dylan Coughlin have no connection to the Blues. There's no incentive necessarily for the Thunderbirds to play them top line minutes.
Well, based on their relationship with the Blues, if I'm the Blues, I'm like,
yes.
Why are you playing those guys rather than our guys, right?
And I don't believe that Carolina can call up the Thunderbirds and say, we need more minutes out of these guys. I'm sure they could they can say it in a casual way, but they can't demand. Whereas, the St. Louis Blues can say, hey, we want to really take a look at X, Y, and Z. I need you to put these guys in this position for us. And whether you win or lose the game, I'm not worried about it. I want to see what Matt Kessel does frontline PK, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the Thunderbirds will answer that. Whereas now they have no obligation necessarily to play these guys. But, you were talking about it earlier, Jamison Reese, second round draft pick for the Hurricanes. Dylan Coughlin, over 100 NHL games. So these are NHL guys that, the little bit I've read, Jamison Reese, fast winger. So these are guys that absolutely can help the Thunderbirds. And hopefully, St. Louis doesn't see that as, well, you're giving these guys time. We want to develop Zachary Dean. We want to develop we need Matt Kessel getting more minutes. Don't play Dylan Coughlin. I don't know if that's a scenario that plays out, but that could be a little bit of an issue for the Thunderbird roster.
Or we're paying Mackenzie McEachern an NHL deal. Why is Jamison Reese playing ahead of Mackenzie McEachern? They have, like you said, they are at the mercy of these other teams. And they've had to scatter guys all over the AHL map.
Right. So I think it'll be interesting. I do think, it can't hurt the Thunderbirds, I don't think, other than creating some headaches for the coaching staff on how they put their lines together. Now that we kind of have an established roster, I'm trying to piece together the lineup. I know we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but like I said, I'm glad there are people a lot smarter than me to make these decisions, and I just get to critique them because there's a lot of talent on the roster. Young.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think the benefit too is, when we look back at last year, just like the amount of injuries.
Yeah.
You lose Nathan Todd early, you lose Tommy Cross early. There were guys that were banged up that all of a sudden now you're calling up these guys from, you have to go sign James Neal, or you have to get your hands on James Neal just to survive.
Sure.
And I think that you can't have too many bodies at this level over the course of the season. And so having extra guys now are guys like Austin Osmanski, probably going to not see as much playing time because of a Dylan Coughlin, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, it's all based on what Springfield and St. Louis's relationship wants to be. And in the article that you're referring to, and people can look it up, it's by Ryan Henkel on the Hockey News. Really, if you just Google Carolina Hurricanes AHL affiliate, it should pop right up. It's the first thing that you see. But I just think it's weird from Carolina's perspective, like the Charlotte Checkers are still wearing Carolina uniforms.
Yeah.
Like, you had a thing. You had you had a team in Charlotte that was right down it's like that Springfield, or it's like that Boston Providence. It's like right there.
Right there.
And for whatever reason, that didn't work out. And that's just so strange to me. I don't understand why Charlotte hasn't changed their colors, their uniform, but I also don't understand why that relationship didn't work out. It's very weird.
Yeah. It would be weird to think that it's a Carolina thing because they are a very consistent NHL team, but it does make you wonder, why couldn't that relationship work? Why can't this relationship work with Chicago to a point where they're willing just to say, I'll go independent? It at least raises red flags for me. But even that being said, it also makes you wonder, here we are, Springfield on the East Coast, nothing against the St. Louis NHL organization. I mean, I really think being with an organization like St. Louis has helped Springfield to become the organization that they have been these last few years, with consistency and a common message. But does that become something down the works where if Carolina's looking for an East Coast team, do they look somewhere like a Springfield to see? But, that's all speculation and at least a good year away. So,
yeah. Well, anybody who travels knows that if you're leaving out of Bradley and you're going to the West Coast, chances are you have to have a layover in a place like Charlotte anyway. I mean,
exactly.
Flights from Charlotte to Springfield go all the time. But from this article that Ryan Henkel wrote, he says perhaps the AHL does expand and the Hurricanes create their own affiliate as the 33rd team. He says, though that might take quite a few years and a lot of money. Like, why would you have an AHL team 10 miles down the road and yet your affiliate is in where? Quebec? It just doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't know. You mentioned that Chicago was kind of the leader in wanting to go independent. I wonder if that's just cockiness from winning the Calder Cup.
After winning? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe they're just like, well, we're going to do our own thing. But
I don't know how they would be allowed either. Like, that would be, if we ever can have an AHL exec on, to maybe explain that to me. I don't understand how you can be an AHL team and reap the benefits of being an AHL team without then being the affiliate for an NHL team. Like, to me, that just doesn't make sense. When you talk about competitive advantages one way or another, I don't need Chicago to win a single game this year, but at the same time, I have to believe that any game they go into, they're going to be outmanned because they don't have NHL bubble players. What's your incentive if you're a Chicago Wolves? There's no call up waiting for you, right?
Right.
So I don't know how that creates a competitive, even playing field either. So how is that in the best interest of the AHL? I don't know. I don't know. It common sense tells me this makes sense to nobody, but here we are in Springfield reaping the benefits, which what looks like two NHL caliber players that hopefully get some playing time in Springfield, and bring some more W's, I guess.
Yeah, I just put in, I went to theAHL.com, Chicago Wolves roster, it's blank. There's not a single player. So I don't know. I don't know what they get out of it, but it is very strange. One of those things that you really hope never happens to your own team.
Yeah.
And even if, again, from an NHL perspective, if you're like, well, let me send my top prospect to Chicago so he can play with, again, like the little Giants. It's just a hodgepodge of washed up has-beens. So it's, I don't know. The whole thing is very strange to me. Again, I wish we had asked Patrick. If we knew now what we knew, Matt, we could have done that. But, like you said, maybe that'd be great question for an AHL exec. I'm sure we can focus on that and try to get that that situation answered.
Sure.
So obviously it's been a busy week in terms of cuts and waivers. And I don't know about you, but I was kind of holding my breath there with waivers when we were talking about Subban and McEachern and those kind of guys. But last week we broke down what we thought the roster would look like, and I was a little surprised about Mackenzie McEachern. I was also a little surprised about Nathan Walker. Walker spent all of last year playing up with St. Louis. Now he's back down. I assume he's not thrilled about that.
Yeah.
But he's also a true pro, and he's been around, and he's been in Springfield and had success. So were there any players that you saw get sent down that were, I don't know, maybe a surprise to you or unexpected?
Not so much sent down. A little bit with the defense, and again, moves can still be made at the NHL level. But keeping Scotty P and Torrey Krug, I mean, I do think they're probably among your top 6 defensemen, but it does, your point of keeping 2 small defensemen on the same team can cause a little bit of an issue. There's still time, NHL trades can happen at any point. Guys can get sent down at any point. That was probably a little bit more surprising. I thought maybe some sort of transaction would have happened. I was keeping a close eye I was down in Nashville this weekend, which is a great time, by the way, if anybody ever wants to go. But I was keeping an eye on the waivers and hoping that those 4 cleared, and happy that all 4 of them did. I think it leads to a lot of decisions now at the goaltending level, how they're going to split the time there, because they do have 4 AHL, NHL quality goaltenders.
Yeah.
And you only play one at a time. So
it's the hardest part of being a goalie.
Yeah.
So real quick, and we haven't even really mentioned it, which we should. We are in the week where regular season AHL hockey games are going to begin, which is awesome.
Yep.
Saturday, 7:05, opening night against the Hartford Wolfpack, presented by MGM Springfield. Don't forget there is a pregame block party for that as well, presented by Community Bank. You get a jersey rally towel and a magnet schedule, which is always comes in handy, especially in my world. When do we have a game this week, hon? Oh, let's get the magnet schedule. And something that I love every time it comes up, Sunday, 3:05. That's the game where the kids get to come. That's when my wife and kids will be there, and we'll have a blast. So, if you can't make it to either of them, of course, you can catch the games on News Radio 560 WHYN. I know fans were a little upset that the pregames weren't on there. That's, again, inside baseball, but I don't think there's an agreement there with the radio station to carry the preseason games.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it too. But anyway, so we got a weekend of hockey, and I can't wait. And as we talk right now, this is the first day that the NHL is rolling, because it's Tuesday. So fantastic that we're here. We are actually finally here.
Absolutely.
So again, when we talk about how loaded this roster is, and you just mentioned the goalies, we do have the ECHL affiliate too, and I'm wondering if there are some players that we penciled in to be on the Thunderbirds roster that might actually get sent down. And Matt, you had a couple of pretty easy ones right off the top.
I mean, I just think, again, right off the top, I would have to imagine 2 goalies, Cranley and Ellis, will be playing down in Worcester. It's not because they're not talented enough to play in the AHL, which I think is a great problem to have. It's just, again, you can only play one at a time, and you only need to carry 2. So let the other 2 go down, play some games, work on what they need to refine, and then when they're called up, they're ready to play. And a bunch of defensemen. If you look on their roster now, on their website, you got 5 centers, you need 4. You got 13 wingers, you need 8. 11 defensemen, you need 6. And then the goalies, right? So you've got to cut or trim half of that roster almost.
Right.
And a bunch of defensemen. And now, again, this is where somebody a lot smarter than me is going to be able to, and St. Louis plays a part in this too. What direction do you want your AHL team to go in? Do you want them to be young and fast, energetic, make mistakes, but young and get development? Or do you want your AHL team to be a good mix of, those not really so much, your NHL bubble guys, but you got some veterans. You've got Austin Osmanskis, you got Hugh McGings. How do you want that roster to start, and how it starts here in October might not look the same come February either. As NHL rosters shift, players get hurt, but I think I'm sad to say I think your guy Biaka Batuka might start down.
Well, I mean, right now they're at 11D, and they signed Josh Jacobs, who is hurt.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just looking at the list, and again, based on what St. Louis saw in the preseason, they liked what they saw from Matt Kessel, so he's in.
Yep.
Leo Loof is a top prospect, so he's in.
Mm-hmm.
Coughlin is too talented to not be in, so he's in. Callie Rosen is a guy that they've invested in and played NHL minutes, so he's in.
Hunter Skinner.
Hunter Skinner might be a fence guy. I mean, Wyatt Kalynuk can play really, really well at this level. Marc-Andre Gaudette is a young guy with a lot of potential. So is Joe Duzak. So, Osmanski probably down. Biaka Batuka probably down. Malmstrom probably down. But even then, you're still at 8,
Mm-hmm.
And so, 2 guys are going to be sitting up on the 3rd floor watching the game, which is, a lot of talent. I don't even know who the ECHL affiliate is. Is it the Worcester Railers?
I think so. And we were saying we might have to go see a few of their games just to even bring information to this podcast, because
it's true.
I do think there's going to be, I don't want to say project these guys to make it to the NHL, but you definitely have AHL level talent. Which is, again, I think it's a good problem to have. I remember early in the year last year going to a few games, and you're reading the starting lineup, and I'm texting you, who are these guys? And you're like, we're playing,
right.
We're playing ECHL tonight hockey, and the scoreboard reflected that. I'm hopeful, and I think there'll be ups and downs throughout the season, but optimistic that when that happens, it's inevitable. It's hockey. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have transactions made at the NHL level that impact you here in Springfield. The guys that come up are ready to play at an AHL level. So, but
hey,
a lot of defensemen.
If Matthew Pekka is on your 3rd line, then you're pretty loaded. That's like you said, that's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
So, it'll be interesting to see what opening night looks like. And again, the nice thing too is when you at this level, when you have 3-3s, when you have back-to-back games, you have a Saturday night game, and then a Sunday afternoon game. That's when you can say to somebody like Hunter Skinner, you're not playing Saturday, but you're in Sunday.
Yep.
And now you have a team that also played Saturday night, and they had to travel.
Yep.
And now all of a sudden you got a bunch of fresh legs, sort of ready to go. So I think that's going to be a huge benefit to them. But yeah, I think the likes of Biaka Batuka, Duzak. There was a forward that I just closed out of it by accident, but there's going to be some guys, Steven Jandrick.
Yep.
Those are going to be those bubble guys that, you're really unsure of what the season's going to bring to them. And again, like we saw last year, it takes, 9 games into the season. Nathan Todd was out for the year.
Yep.
There was a winger. I think it was McLaughlin. Is it Dylan McLaughlin?
Dylan McLaughlin. Yep.
Got hurt really early. Tommy Cross, obviously. So, as those injuries come, and they're going to come, at least the depth this year is like insane. Now I don't want to get fans like too fired up, because if you look at Providence is freaking loaded, and some of the moves that Boston made to send guys down is bananas. And Hershey's Hershey, and Bridgeport's only going to get better. And all these things that we talked about with Patrick Williams, I think that this is still going to be an insanely difficult division, but I think there are teams that they are much better than. I think they're better than Hartford on paper, right? I think they're better than Wilkes-Barre. I think they're better than the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. So I think we're gearing up for a really, really fun season of hockey here in Springfield.
I think so. And that's really, at the end of the day, all you can really ask for. I think you hope a similar situation that Hartford had last year, where they didn't play from, out of the gate, they did not look very good, but they're playing their best hockey when they needed to, and they make a playoff run. I think that could absolutely be a Springfield type team, where you go through your peaks and valleys throughout the season, and hopefully you hope that they're in a playoff run and they're playing their best hockey at the end of the year. And I think a Springfield team is absolutely set up to have that type of season.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously we are on Facebook. We are on Twitter as well. We're on a lot of social media, and you can follow us at SRG Podcast. Obviously just shake, rattle, and goal right into Facebook. We'll pop right up. And we asked you, and we try to ask you folks as much as we can to ask us questions, whatever questions,
Sure.
hot takes, whatever you want to discuss. We're happy to talk about it. And so we did have a couple of those. Our good friend Katrina King, who is an absolute sweetheart and has been a season ticket holder for such a long time. She asked us the question, will both Bitten players play together? I don't know if that's on the same line or what, but I happen to think that Sam might be one of those guys that ends up in the ECHL to start the season. He loves to fight, and they love fighting in the ECHL. So I think that might be one of those things that happen. What do you think, Matt, in terms of the Bitten brothers?
Yeah, I mean, I think Will is probably a top 2 line guy. I think Sam is bottom 2, like you said, ECHL, healthy scratch, from time to time. Where I could see them maybe paired together as the season progresses is on sort of those specialty lines, a PK or a power play line. If you're looking for that spark of a scrappy penalty kill, it's a scrappy type game, and you need that scrappy penalty kill. I could see them on a line together because Will has that edge in him too. I don't think you see them playing on the same line 5-on-5, at least to start the year. I don't see that. They probably have some great connection too, as brothers typically do, a lot of time in the driveway playing hockey together. But I see Will as maybe a top 2 line guy, and Sam bottom 2, healthy scratch here and there.
I just learned that Sam Bitten does UFC fighting in the off season. So for one, I don't want any part of that guy in terms of fighting, but I think I think there's value there. And I know that we're in a sport that's trying to get rid of fighting and all that stuff. But I think that when you face a team that's bigger than you, and Hartford's got some guy. Hartford is huge. Hartford has forwards that are 6'8", that Matt Rempe, right? When you need somebody in the lineup to stick up for other guys, or you can't watch Mikhail Abramov try to kill penalties anymore or something like that, I think that's when you'll see. I think he'll be more of a situational utility kind of guy. And again, you don't want him necessarily sitting on the Mass Pike between Worcester and Springfield for the whole year either. But I do think that they are in 2 very different established roles in terms of players. Will is very, very established at this level. Sam's trying to break in. So I don't know if they're going to, like you said, get a lot of time together, but it'll be interesting to see where that shakes out as to where Sam is. And again, you don't want to necessarily, you got to make decisions what's right for the team, but you don't want to break their hearts either. They're both like so pumped that they're on the same team.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be like, hey, glad you guys are together. Bye. We're sending him to Worcester, right? So,
well, and I think too, and you kind of alluded to it. And I personally think if you can make a name for yourself or identify yourself as like a guy, you are this type of guy, that absolutely, in my opinion, means there's space for you on an AHL roster. So we've talked about it that right now the Springfield roster has a lot of talent on it. There will be call-ups. I think in time you will see Sam Bitten getting quality time at the AHL level. But maybe this year, and he's still younger, bottom 2 line minutes kind of thing. But he can play, and he'll carve out a role for himself, I think, as the season progresses.
Our buddy John Bober chimed in as well, and John's just one of the nicest guys you're going to meet. John, if you're walking around the Thunderdome this weekend, come say hi. It's always a pleasure to chat with you for a minute. But John asked a question that we touched on, I think probably the first episode we did, and here we are now, Matt, 5 weeks later at least.
Yeah,
which is so cool. He's asking a legitimate question for now: who will wear the C's and the A's? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or Want me to
I'm
fire it
sticking to
off?
my guns. I've my original. I'm for nothing more than stubbornness now at the moment. I don't have any other insight. So I'm just, my original thought was that it would be a guy like Pekka or Bitten, veteran NHL experience, somewhat local. Matthew Pekka going to Quinnipiac University, right down 91 in Connecticut.
Go Bobcats.
Yep. So I think he's, in my opinion, your logical C. And then I think, you probably have Bitten. If he's not the C, he's an A. Will Bitten, that is. A guy like Kessel, who the St. Louis Blues like. And he has a talent. We've talked about this before too. He finds himself at the wrong place at the wrong time, making silly mistakes that they all make, but his mistakes just always seem to be the worst time, lead to points for the opposing team. But maybe he was a late send down. So maybe you look at a guy like him who's going to take on a bit of a leadership role wearing the A. Those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think off the top, if you look at any player that is, I mean, I call them NHLers at the AHL level, like any guy who got sent down kind of late, that's probably going to be up and down. I would take them off the list strictly because they are going to be up and down. So, like, there are guys that could wear the A: Mackenzie McEachern, Nathan Walker, Callie Rosen. These guys are more than qualified. I just don't think that there's going to be so much up and down that I don't think they're going to bother giving those leadership positions to those guys. Pekka, Bitten, I think, are the two obvious answers. Adam Gaudette is somebody that's been around and can totally handle that. But I will give you one more. And again, as long as he consistently sticks in the lineup based on the numbers, I don't know why I love this player. Hunter Skinner.
Sure.
Hunter Skinner is in a position, early 20s, but he's played in the league now for 3 or 4 years. I think he's a perfect candidate to wear the A. And he's physical. He gets some penalties. He gets into some fights. But the more guys that get penalties and get into fights tend to have a better relationship with the refs, which is kind of strange to say. But I think that's an honest thing. And I think that he's a really good candidate for that. I wanted to, and this is I just thought about it because we did actually have a game on Friday. And I wanted to mention something that I took away. And obviously the Thunderbirds lost 5-0. Every single penalty, and look, Thunderbirds fans, I love you guys. You were on these refs. And I think that the refs that we had, those two guys, Terreri, and I can't think of the other guy's name, I think are two of actually the best refs that we have at this level. I was really impressed that every penalty, and especially after fights, the refs took their time to go into the box to talk to each player about what happened, what they did wrong, what their expectations were. And, Sam Bitten was one, and he got into a fight with another guy, and the guy on Providence was animated towards the ref, like, well, he drops the gloves and he comes after me. What am I supposed to do? How did he not get an instigator? Blah, 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 blah. And then he went and talked to Sam Bitten. And again, I don't know what was said. All I can see is Sam's reaction, which was, okay, yep, okay, well, thank you for clarifying. Yep, okay, And if these guys are going to make it, if they're going to get better and they're going to make it into the NHL and they're going to live the dream, it takes coaching, it takes effort, it takes working, it takes all these things. Sometimes it takes a little bit of those other things too. Going back to what Kevin Johnson said, learning how to do an interview, learning how to develop a relationship with a ref without blowing your top, knowing why a ref is making a call. All those things I think have such value to young players. And that was one of those things that I just kind of took away. I don't mean to, again, my ADD kicks in. I don't mean to go on a rant, but that's one of those things I noticed that I thought was really cool. And one of those things, again, you only get to see at ice level. Yeah. But the refs taking that time to talk to those players, I thought was really cool. So.
Well, that's great insight and very well said. And I think now, knowing that, now what you're looking for, especially look at the AHL level, excuse me, it is a it's a professional developmental league, right? So now, can you take that coaching? Can you take that criticism? Can you take that constructive criticism
Yeah, the
of your
critiques.
game
Yeah.
and better yourself for it? Hopefully, a guy like Sam Bitten can.
Yeah. Well,
how do you think?
Go
Because again, I was down in Nashville this weekend. Game from Friday on the scoreboard, in the stat lines didn't look too pretty. They came back, lost, but compared the two games, like, were those teachable moments accepted? Did Springfield grow from game 1 in the preseason to game 2 in the preseason? Did you see any of that?
Well, game 2 was in Providence, so I didn't
Yeah.
get to see or listen to it. Again, I think I personally think that Providence and Springfield are going to be at the top of. I think they're going to be number 1 and number 2, and I think that it's because of the depth of not only their prospects but the players that were sent down. I just think both of those teams are absolutely loaded, and Providence played a pretty heavy roster. My only complaint with Springfield was that they looked a little out of sorts. Like, they would go on the power play and they would have guys that have played together before. It was like Gaudet, Pekka, Bitten. It wasn't new guys. They were the old guys, and they looked really out of sorts, especially on special teams. And quite frankly, Zarenko did not have a good game.
Yeah.
So
those happen.
Of course. And I thought he was magnificent for St. Louis, especially in those prospect games. So I don't think that's going to consistently happen. I think we're going to get a much better sample of what you're talking about this weekend when we look at Saturday's game versus Sunday's game.
Sure.
And playing two different opponents, but like, I'm really excited for that Sunday game against Providence, because Providence is going to be fully loaded. You're going to be fully loaded. I think that's just going to be one of the best hockey games at this level that you're going to see. And I think I look forward to those games all year, I think. And again, not just because I'm a Bruins fan, it's more because I know the ins and outs of the Bruins organization. And you're looking at Lysell and Mark McLaughlin, and they just sent down Mason Lowry, and they're loaded with prospects and vets. And I just think these two teams are going to really go at it all year. So I think we'll get a better gauge of that coming this week.
Good.
So, well, this has been a heck of an episode. We really appreciate Patrick Williams taking the time. Again, you can check out his material at theahl.com, at nhl.com. He hosts the Around the A podcast, so definitely go check that guy out. We really appreciate him taking the time. And of course, we always want to give a shout out to our friends at White Lion Brewing. Check out their new location in Amherst. And of course, at Tower Square right in downtown Springfield, the place to go for Springfield Thunderbirds pregame and postgame. Why not? A great local partner here in the 413, and I think that's what we try to do is be local, right? I want to rant about it, but Eastern Mass has abandoned us in politics and in caring for our roads and paving our streets, and all. They've abandoned us. And I think what brings Springfield and the area in Western Mass together is that self-reliance, that self-sufficiency that we do out here. And places like White Lion, man, you start in downtown Springfield and you make a name for yourself and a brand. And I'm really happy for Ray Berry and all the things those guys do over there. So, and Nate Costa, who again, from Cathedral, local dude, you love to see that. So a big thank you to Patrick Williams. Big thank you to Ray Berry. Thanks to Nate Costa for supporting us as he does. I don't know if you know that, but the president of the team listens to our podcast, which is cool. So
that's
what's
awesome.
up, Nate? And we will be back with episode 6. Ideally, we're going to have some hockey games to talk about. I think we'll probably record early week.
Yep.
After those games are played. So we'll have a full rundown for you, and we'll talk to you then.
Absolutely. We'll see everybody this weekend in the Thunderdome. Let's go T-Birds.